Hello everybody, welcome to day 5 of the Daily Language Diary, and just look at the light. It is another beautiful sunny winter day here in London. I am very excited about today's episode because building upon last night where I really started to get this surge of excitement and emotion about starting to reconnect with some of the favorite activities that I used to do in French, including music, cinema, but one of the things I've been looking forward to the most is actually getting back into my old favorite French podcasts. And so I've come out now to go on a lovely walk, and I can't wait to see how this goes. I have no idea if I'll be able to understand everything with no problem, or at least minimal problems, or maybe it's going to be a huge challenge. I simply have no idea, but I'm so excited to find out. So let's go on a nice little walk, and after that, I'll tell you all about the podcast, and we'll just see how it goes. Oh my gosh, something very exciting is happening right now. I can't wait to tell you about it when I get back. Oh, my hands are freezing, but I don't care. I'm having a wonderful time. Wow. You know what? Whatever you're doing, stop, get yourself a hot drink because it's story time. I'm gonna make myself some herbal tea and I will meet you on the sofa. All right, I am gonna gift you one of the most wonderful gems of French listening material you could ever find. It might be my favorite podcast of all time. It's called Chemins d'écrivains, which is like the path of authors. And it's an on-location interview podcast where they speak with a famous author and they talk about how that specific location has shaped them as a person, as a writer, and even specific books. And when I tell you that this podcast changed my life, I mean, it was so delightful to listen to. And I became so inspired by all these different authors. Their way of speaking is so beautiful. The way they describe things and tell stories. You can hear the sounds of the city or the countryside, wherever they might be. And it's just so beautifully made. I think discovering so many wonderful authors and books and then going on to read those books and coming back to listen again, I became so inspired to even try writing a novel in French, which I pursued quite seriously for a while. I became inspired to want to live in France for a number of years because I would just hear all these beautiful stories from different parts of France. And oh my gosh, it is just perfect for learning French, for practicing your listening comprehension, but also for daydreaming, for getting lost in all these different stories, in all these different places. And then, of course, so many of the books on that shelf are actually thanks to this podcast. So let's take a look. Where should we start? I have so many. Okay, let's do, it's gotta be this one. This is a book called Et si c'était vrai, which is If Only It Were True by Marc Levy. And the podcast episode that I just listened to on that walk was actually interviewing him. And oh my gosh, it is so wonderful. It is in Paris, in the exact neighborhood, standing outside of the apartment where he lived with his son as a single father when he wrote this book and didn't even realize he was writing a novel, let alone a novel that would go on to cartonner, as they say in French, and just bestseller, and it just completely catapulted him into stardom as an author, as a 39, 40-year-old architect who was a single dad and never imagined becoming an author. I mean, it's just a wonderful story. And in that episode, you hear the sounds of Paris. You hear the literal traffic noises that he says drove him crazy back at that time. And it's not only this book, there's also a wonderful book, which I never actually finished, but I still have the bookmark exactly where I left it. Mes amis, mes amours, my friends, my loves. He even takes the interviewer to Le Jardin de Luxembourg. This is a specific little square garden in Paris, and talks about how that was the origin of this book and tells a really lovely story about how that happened. And I could go on with books from Marc Levy, but let me tell you another story. So, quick context. Actually, first let's actually have some tea, because that's important. Okay, so some of my most fond and beloved childhood memories are from when my dad would take me traveling for my birthday in the summer. And for a number of years, we'd go to the south of France. But one year, we accidentally discovered this wonderful hill town called Villefranche-sur-Mer. And it was a complete accident. We decided to just get off randomly. And we fell in love with this place. And we ended up going back there for several years in a row. And whenever I would talk to people about France, they usually hadn't been there or even heard of it. And so it was always this kind of secret place to me. And I've never been back there since that time with my dad. And I want you to keep that context in mind for just a second, because there's a beautiful book here called La Délicatesse. And this book is extremely meaningful to me because it's the first book I ever read in French without a dictionary. I remember that in the beginning, I was using a dictionary here and there, but as I was reading through, I just realized I didn't need it anymore. And it took me a really long time to get there in French. And it was the first time in any language I had been able to read a novel without a dictionary. And so this book, like as the book went on, I just found my excitement growing, and I just couldn't believe that with each page I turned, I didn't have to keep stopping. I just kept going and I was getting the story. And so David Fuenquinos became a very important writer for me. And what do you know, there's a beautiful episode of the podcast Chemins d'écrivain with David Fuenquinos. And in that episode, I learned about this book, Charlotte. And do you know where this book takes place? Villefranche-sur-Mer. And he talked about how he had to spend time there doing so much research and really understanding the history of this story so that he could write this book accurately. And I mean, I just couldn't believe that I stumbled upon, by accident, a story that took place in one of my favorite childhood cities. I just wanted to give you that little story time before we get into what happened today, because I really think it highlights just how magical learning a foreign language can be, but also how much certain discoveries can even influence your life. You know, I mean, I really was heavily impacted by this podcast and then the things I went on to discover because of it. And I just have so many fond memories of taking long walks as I was all alone back in Charlotte, North Carolina after a pretty difficult year. And I just remember an entire winter and Christmas season where I was just accompanied by these books, by French cinema, by French music. And speaking of music, remember yesterday I specifically mentioned one single artist, Charles Aznavour, one of my favorite French singers of all time. I used to listen to him for hours and hours and hours. I used to learn the lyrics of his songs, which are incredible. Well, the final question the interviewer asked Marc Levy in the podcast episode today was, which song would you pick if you had to sort of give a soundtrack to Paris and to that time in your life? And he picked La Bohème by Charles Aznavour. And they played the song at the end of the podcast. And it was my first time hearing that song in so many years. And I mean, it just was the final little piece to a beautiful walk, a beautiful experience. And that brings me to finally sharing what actually happened. So, to my surprise, I understood just about everything. I mean, there were some words that maybe I didn't quite catch, but I heard so many words and phrases in that podcast episode that I haven't heard for so many years that if I was speaking French myself, I would definitely not have been able to remember them. But it all just came flooding back. And I mean, it was delightful. French really does have something special for me in the way that they phrase things. Like when I was reading this book, I remember very specifically laughing out loud on every page. And I would say half of the times it's because it was actually funny and maybe a French person would also laugh. But I think half the time I would laugh, I just found it entertaining. I just think it's so fun the way that things are said and expressed. And so as I was listening to that podcast today, there were so many of those beautiful phrases and ways of expressing things. And it is just beautiful. And I hadn't really heard that in so long. And so it was so beautiful just to experience that unexpectedly on that walk and to discover that I can still follow that kind of content without too much trouble. So I will leave a link in the description and in the pinned comment section of this video in case you're interested. I'll link to the podcast itself and also the specific episode that I listened to today. But I just want to go now and like every day the rest of this month, just enjoy rediscovering my favorite old episodes, discovering new ones that I haven't even heard before. And I think from a language perspective, now I'm just so excited because every time I would hear one of those words or phrases today that was just so delightful and I hadn't heard in so long, it was like discovering a new little gem, right? And so now I just can't wait to hear all the different things that I have forgotten about that I'm going to rediscover through listening to this podcast. And I do think there was something particularly special about going back and listening to something that I once loved so dearly. It made it so much more special than just picking up something new. So I guess I'm a very nostalgic person in general. Maybe that doesn't apply to everybody, but for me, that truly is one of the joys of coming back to French. Okay, I hope this wasn't too long and rambly. I just really couldn't imagine talking about what happened today without sharing those stories with you because it was really just so meaningful. And I just love how this daily language diary series is turning into such a beautiful, unexpected journey. And it's only day 5. I just can't wait to see what's going to happen next. I have no idea. And I guess that's the beauty of it. We're discovering it together day by day. And I just love being able to hang out with you all every single day this month. So the only thing left for me to do today is my gratitude drawing, which I do really want to make time for. And so I'm gonna take a shower, get cozy, and get set up to do a drawing.